I'm Bel Bare. This is Sacred Mechanics. Hi, I'm Bel. Thanks for tuning into Sacred Mechanics. I thought I'd take this opportunity to talk about a novel that I wrote in 2020 and republished last year called Breaking the Girl. The novel is deeply personal to me, and it's partly written based on lived experience in the early 90s, being enmeshed in surf culture in Australia, on the Gold Coast in particular. And it's a love story. It's also tragic in many ways. But when I was writing it, I was consciously weaving through an undertow, a current that is much more spiritual and an entanglement of many ideas, folkloric and mystical and biblical, and there's a few archetypes in there that you'll be able to easily spot, and some are a bit more subtle. Anyway, all of this to say that this podcast is all about this book, and I'm going to decipher some of this for you. And it'd be really cool if you did happen to read the book, or if you've already read it, welcome. And here we go. I'll start with a quote from the book. Some things in life don't seem to have a beginning or an ending. You can't be sure if these things nourish or erode your soul, but you still let them consume you as if entranced by a flame, waiting to be burned. So when I started writing, this was all I had. That couple of sentences was it, and I built my story around that, and it really grew from there. At its heart, Breaking the Girl is a novel about transformation. When I wrote it, I wasn't consciously setting out to craft a spiritual parable, but as with most meaningful creative work, the symbolism emerges from somewhere deeper, a place within me that understands the language of loss, change, and awakening. At first glance, it might read as a story about grief and desire, but there's something alchemical happening underneath, a slow burning process of transmutation that echoes the cycles we all move through when everything familiar falls away. Ash's story came to me as a meditation on grief and identity. She's not just mourning her twin sister, Edie. She's unraveling. Ash is the classic orphan heroine, spiritually unparented and left to navigate a world that no longer makes sense. Her grief isn't linear or logical, it's oceanic. And like the heroines of old fairy tales, she must wander into the darkness, undergo trials, and face the mirror of her own shadow before she can begin to reclaim herself. La Quinta, the house featured in the novel, is a character in itself. I've always been drawn to the forbidden house archetype. In Breaking the Girl, La Quinta is that space. It's seductive, decaying, and filled with secrets. I imagined it as a symbolic extension of Ash's psyche, falling apart, barely holding together, haunted by what has gone unsaid and unfelt. The house offered me a stage on which the emotional and metaphysical could play out side by side. As I wrote, I realised it was also a space of potential, a kind of spiritual cocoon where old self could be dismantled. And yes, much like the enchanted castles of folk tales, it was both a prison and a place of passage. Jay, one of the main characters in the story, and the surfers that Ash and Jay lived with, became expressions of untamed nature, both beautiful and dangerous. Jay in particular embodies something feral and magnetic, the kind of desire that teaches through its wildness. He's not a love interest in any traditional sense. He's more like a catalyst. He's violent. He's full of rage. And from the outside, in the outset of the story, when Ash sees him, he has a beauty about him that soon decays into something quite terrible. And then as he progresses as a character, his fragility comes through as a young, damaged man as well. Through Ash's connection with Jay, I wanted to explore the tension between surrender and survival, pleasure and pain, and the hunger to lose oneself, and the necessity of coming back whole. There's also an element of punishment to this, where there's a guilt that Ash survives her sister, her twin sister Edie, and as things progress and Jay's abuse increases and becomes more apparent, it feels like Ash is leaving herself in the line of fire through guilt of being alive at all. So there's a lot to unpack there. And as a domestic violence survivor and living through this experience, also in grief while being abused, I had to add this, that women just, it's like a slow suicide. It's a terrible, terrible place to be. And sometimes I still marvel how I got the strength to run away, to escape. But anyway, in all of this framing of this story, it's good to keep in mind that the characters are young adults as well. So they're not fully formed in their logic, and passion drives everything. So that leads me into talking about the storm that tears through the house, and that it was written as a spiritual cleansing. On the surface, it's chaos, but beneath that, it's ritual destruction, the necessary breakdown that precedes renewal. Writing that scene in those chapters, I felt the storm as a force moving through Ash, not just around her and not just through the house. It was transformative as it whipped through and touched on everyone's lives. And it wasn't just the house breaking, it was her emotional architecture crumbling, allowing something new to be born, and perhaps also for Jay. One of my favorite characters in the book is Nebraska, and she's one of the most elusive figures in the novel, and maybe the most important. She came to me fully formed, a guide, a seer, a liminal being. I never wanted to explain her too much. Some characters are meant to remain partially veiled. Nebraska drifts between worlds, surfacing at moments of great transition. In many ways, she's a spiritual midwife who leads others across thresholds, an apparition, an oracle. When she speaks, it's often with riddles or poetic wisdom, and her presence reminds me that not all teachings are direct. Some truths arrive obliquely through atmosphere, intuition, and dream. There's a moment in the novel where Nebraska says, "For you, he is everywhen." That line flowed through me as if it already existed somewhere else. It echoed the idea that we're shaped by a timeless connection, karmic bonds, soul recognitions, mysterious repetitions. To Ash, and maybe to the reader, Nebraska's voice invites a deeper inquiry. What is real? What is remembered? What endures across lifetimes? And we all know that that answer is love. Breaking the Girl is set by the sea. The ocean in Breaking the Girl is not just a setting, it's a force. The sea has always been a symbol of the subconscious, of feeling, of the divine feminine in her rawest form. My father used to say, God is in the ocean. And I always found this very powerful. My father was not a religious or spiritual man by any means, but this was quite profound. One day when I asked him about God, and that he said that God is in the ocean, I believe it. I feel it. And I wanted this to come through in the book. Ash is drawn to the sea instinctively. The surfers, like gulls or sea creatures, dance with that power. They understand it with their bodies. I wanted the ocean to be both a threat and comfort, mirror and mother. There's a passage where the surfers disappear into the waves, and the book says, "From the shore, it looked like a fight. From the water, it looked like love." That paradox is the heart of the novel, the way transformation can feel like ruin and how love can undo us. The novel isn't only about a girl breaking, it's about what breaks open. Yes, Ash falls apart. Yes, she descends. But it's all part of a larger pattern, death and rebirth, the sacred spiral of change. I wanted to write something that honoured the felt experience of grief while offering a thread of light for those who choose to walk into their own darkness and return with something new. Breaking the Girl isn't a tidy book, and it's not meant to be. It's a story for anyone who has felt themselves dissolve and wondered if something sacred might grow in the ruins. It speaks to the unnameable space between worlds, between what is lost and what is yet to come. It's my offering to those who are in between, to those who are breaking, and to those who are becoming. So there's a deepness and a richness to this book, all played out on a stage of the summer of 1991, the summer that Nirvana comes to town. It's a real ride. Anyway, thank you for listening. You can listen to me read Breaking the Girl as an audiobook, and it's also available as a paperback in any good bookshop online. Thanks for listening to Sacred Mechanics. I'm Bel Bare.